Hello, everybody. So, another reading of my novel Walking on Cinders, because again it's just gone 6:30, so, as every night is the case, as the lockdown continues, the isolation continues, we're reading through the Kraken's Curse. I've already read 32 chapters, of Walking on Cinders, plus something a little bit different as well. I'll be here every night to read for you as long as this continues. Hopefully you're enjoying it. So this is chapter 18, and then we have chapter 19 as well. 18. Captured. The dark night drew its arms around the land. The light from the tiniest stars many, many millions of miles away glinted faintly through the wisps of black cloud that covered the sky. A slight chill blew along the hilltops and down the bank of a field. At the bottom was a hedgerow, and beyond the hedgerow a small stream. Many nocturnal animals rustled around in the leaves below the stark berry bushes, awakening from their hibernation. The field looked silent, still, and empty. But behind the hedgerow and beyond the stream, 3 figures moved. They were slow at first, and it was only when they were sure that there was nothing to block their path that they continued a little quicker. They crept low to the ground, so as to ensure they could not be seen, and looked for a suitable place to cross the stream. A little further along they located a gap in the hedge that would grant them access to the furthest field and the prize for which they were searching. 2 of the figures made it across the stream in a clear jump, but the last needed to be helped. Slowly all 3 made their way into the field and looked up towards the sky. The blackness seemed to have closed in tightly around them. The stars had now disappeared completely and the whole landscape had an eerie look about it. Keeping his voice low and his body close to the ground, one of the figures spoke. "This is the place," the voice whispered. "This is definitely the right field, I have a feeling." "Well then," spoke another, "let's not put off what must be done." "I agree," said the third voice, and the only female. "It would help us a great deal if we caught it here, caught it tonight." The figure who had spoken first took the decision to stand high in the field. His eyes were dark and misty, and he knew that there was something he must discover. He had come here tonight on a mission, and he would not leave until it was completed. Slowly he walked up towards the very top of the hill, and the others followed. They remained quiet, and as they moved, nobody spoke, for they were on the march and needed to conserve their energy. It was important to keep the creature safe, and it would not be wise to wake it, as it would more than likely run for the closest cover. "Megan," spoke the first figure again. "Yes," the lady spoke. "I want you to stay close to me," the first figure continued. "Horace, you can keep to the far left of the field, in case it tries to escape." "Will do," replied the third and final voice, and the figure turned and started to walk off to the right. The plans had been laid and every intricate detail was covered. Any mishaps, any mistakes would all be taken care of. They had one shot at capturing this mystical creature, and if they didn't, there would be no point in even trying to destroy the evil sea demon associated with it. Making sure to keep the hedge on the left side of him, Arthur Boston, the first dark figure, made his way up and over the brow of the hill. He would have the key position, and if their mission failed, it would all be his fault. As he took his imperative footing, he couldn't help but think how cruel it would be for his father to be locked in a cage. But he knew that for his and the whole coastline safety, it must be done. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted while out hunting for its prey, and the smallest of creatures scuttled beneath the hedgerows out of sight. The monotonous silence returned, the expanse of hill forlorn and all its exits covered. They were ready to begin. As the darkest depths of the night began to draw in, the one source of light high in the sky seemed to expand. The moon was full on this particular evening, which helped them greatly, and its glow bathed the field in a soft, subtle presence. It was the royalty of the sky. Time passed so slowly, for nobody spoke and everybody upheld their positions. They were waiting for any sign of movement, and if they missed it, they would fail. Suddenly, as quickly as a bullet from a pistol, something moved in the hedge. It wasn't a small creature, but it was unmistakable, and it was just what they were looking for. Quickly, and without hesitation, the silver fox darted out from his secure hiding place. He knew he was taking a risk, like that night many moons ago. But unlike that night, this time around he felt safe, and he knew something was secure. The fox rounded the corner of the hill and darted past Horace, who slid down to try and capture it, missed and signalled to Arthur and Megan to get ready. Again the fox ran over the hilltop and down, darting around the rabbit holes and gliding through the long grass. Arthur reached down a second time, but the fox defeated him. It seemed that he was enjoying himself. Yes, he was enjoying himself, for here he was going to be captured. He would at least have a little bit of fun doing it. As the first two had done, Megan floundered in her attempt to capture, and the fox was left to round the field once again. The hedgerows were awake and listening now. Their long, wiry fingers had sensed the figure's arrival, and they knew the fox had left its hiding place. They would be there and protect him if it was necessary, but at the moment it was not. As the fox darted in and out of the retreating bramble bushes, he mouthed a last goodbye to those who had protected him for so long, before rounding on the hill once again. The large bank of the slope lay out in front of him like a dream. He could sense it as he padded quickly upwards, that Arthur had returned to rescue him, and that soon he would be going home. He would be safe and he would be sound. The silver fox's fur glinted in the pale glow from the full moon, and he knew what must happen. He must run straight for his son's arms and await his capture. As the creature darted towards Arthur's position, Horace and Megan looked on and smiled, for they too could tell that Arthur would succeed this time. The silver fox stopped dead. He had hit something soft and something safe. Arthur reached behind him from the wire cage and beckoned for Horace and Megan to join him. He opened the wire mesh at the front and obediently the fox entered. The cage was cramped and cold, but he knew he was safe, and as a way of providing this to his son, he curled up in a tight ball and waited for sleep to arrive. Well, that was a job well done, even if I say so myself, Horace spoke admiringly, as the three triumphant captors made their way along the country lane the next morning. I feel it went according to plan, Arthur replied, without showing any emotion. I agree, Megan smiled. All three of them were heading back to Horace's cottage at the bottom of the village, which, for the time being, they had deemed to be a relatively safe hiding place for their guest. Arthur carried the cage in his left hand, and as he walked with a rhythmic motion, the fox purred and groomed itself. It would be true to say that if you looked upon this scene from afar, it could be mistaken for a relatively peaceful and friendly gathering. If you were to assume this, however, you would of course be gravely wrong, and for a split second you may believe it. Arthur, Megan and Horace believed it also. Sitting in the small cottage, all three shared a cup of tea and some biscuits and reviewed their journey so far. They talked only of the happy memories and of the things they had discovered, for this brought them comfort and security. The weather had brightened now that spring had arrived, and slowly the flowers were opening their buds once more and would soon set about attracting the birds and the bees. The friends were enjoying one of the last days of freedom together, for they knew soon it would be time to face their demon. There were treacherous and terrible times ahead, which they knew may result in tragedy, but they had made a promise to each other, and for now at least, there was a chance to put such things to the back of their minds. Okay, chapter 19 of The Kraken's Curse. 19. The Old Farmhouse. The first thing that the friends realised was that Horace's cottage was not a safe hiding place after all. They discovered this a few days later when, during the night, several of the windows were broken and the door was blown off by an enormous wind, most likely sent by the Kraken. Horace knew what this meant. The Kraken was somehow aware that they were hiding the silver fox, and he wasn't going to rest until he had the creature for himself. Everyone knew that they couldn't take this risk, especially as they were not so sure how far the Kraken would actually go to get what he wanted. They needed somewhere else to lay low. And so, Captain Jonathan McCrae was dispatched to find a location that would act as a good hiding place for the friends. Somewhere that was preferably long since deserted. The captain spent many hours strolling along the pleasant country lanes and across fields, looking for such a place, but it was all to no avail. He knew it had to be close to Poole Harbour, but it also had to be secure enough that the Kraken would not be able to find it. By the end of the day, Captain Jonathan McCrae was getting weary, and he still had not yet found anywhere suitable. As he walked along the lane, he absent-mindedly picked some blackberries from the hedgerow and thought. There was only one place left that he could try. Everywhere else had proved useless. He was close to the place. He had walked close on purpose. But he did not want to visit. He did not want to go into the farmyard, and he did not want to talk to the farmer's wife. What must be done, though, must be done, and silently, Captain Jonathan McCrae turned the corner and paced into the farmyard. At first, the captain noticed how quiet it was. Far too quiet. And it looked run down as well. It was far more dilapidated than he ever remembered it. On one side of the yard was a tall rust-framed barn that had a large hole in the roof, so that the rainwater had dripped through and formed a puddle on the thick scattering of hay and animal feed. At the other end was a set of stone pens, with gaps where the wooden gates should have been. Lying in the middle and marking the centre of the farmyard was the farmhouse. It looked unusually well kept compared to the other buildings. There was a dark green door in the centre with a golden door knocker, and either side were windows with dark crimson curtains. Captain McCrae, now being sure that nobody was around to notice him, walked up to the front door and peered into the windows. He was somewhat surprised at what he saw. The rooms were still full of their original furniture. It was as if nothing had been removed and the owners had just left the house without a trace. The only conclusion Captain McCrae could come to was that dear old Jackie, his brother's ex-wife, had passed away, and due to a lack of any relatives, the house had been left pretty much as it was. It would be the perfect hideout for their planning stages, and a place to return after the many battles that would occur between the Friends and the evil beast that ravaged the seas around the coast. As he turned around and headed back out towards the roadside, Captain McCrae felt at last an urge to push his luck. He passed the green oak door, pushed it forwards and watched it click open to reveal the hallway inside. He couldn't help but smile and noticed that behind the door on the inside, a key had been left on the windowsill. It couldn't be more perfect. Locking the door behind him and pocketing the key, Captain McCrae almost jogged towards the road before heading back to the direction of the village. He couldn't wait to tell Arthur, Horace and the others the brilliant news. Arthur Boston was sitting on the cliff edge close to his small cottage when Captain Jonathan McCrae arrived. He walked over to the edge and took a seat on an upright stone. "Arthur, I have some great news," he smiled. "I take it you found a place," Arthur replied, a little absent-mindedly. "Yes, I'd almost given up hope of finding somewhere, and the only place I could think of to visit was the home of my brother's ex-wife." "And what did she say?" Arthur asked, suddenly more interested as he remembered the time that he had run in with Paul McCrae with disastrous consequences. "Well," Captain McCrae replied, the smile almost beaming out of each side of his face, "that's the thing. I got there, walked into the farmyard, and discovered that the whole place was empty. It was completely deserted." "Well, that is a stroke of luck," Arthur finished, pulling himself up from the cliff edge and beginning to walk back towards his cottage. "We had better tell Horace and the others right away. Then we can begin to move any belongings and such that we might need." Horace's cottage had been their hideout for a few weeks now. In that time they had done little to create a barrier between themselves and the outside world, and this was perhaps the most likely reason why they had been attacked several times by the Kraken's army. Horace did not take kindly to his windows being smashed and his possessions damaged, so as the attacks reoccurred, he found a sudden urge to run outside and shout towards nobody in particular, in a bid to ward off whoever had thrown the rock or tried to break down the door. In fact, in most cases, the only thing he did succeed in doing was to infuriate their enemies even more, and this resulted in a much harsher attack the following day. Horace was of course delighted when Captain McCrae returned with news that they had found somewhere else. "We must move everything we have, and we are completely dependent upon immediately," he said. "But beware, even though we move, we may still be attacked. It's best to leave anything of great value at your own homes." And so the move had begun. Required necessities such as changes of clothes, toothbrushes, food supplies and books had been taken over first, and this was then followed by an array of maps, compasses, notes and all the research that Horace had already been working on. This was of great sentimental value and was most important to their final attack, so it was decided that this would be moved late in the evening, almost under the cover of darkness. It was such a well-planned operation that if you had stood right outside the cottage for the whole day, you would almost never have noticed the slight trickle of people that left and returned at different times. Horace had planned it like this, so that if they were being tailed or watched, it would be less obvious that they were where they were heading to. One of the most important things everybody had agreed on was that the house needed to be protected in some way. Of course, with the farmyard being as open to the countryside as it was very hard to conceal it easily. Horace and Captain McCrae came up with a plan, however, and one that would at least keep the intruders at bay for a short time. The following morning, the pair ventured into the woods nearby and gathered piles of green leaves and branches. By the time they returned to the farmhouse, Megan was waiting for them. She had taken out some old netting that they had found in one of the barns, perhaps once used to keep the animals in, and had tied several pieces together, so that it could be draped over the front of the house. And so they set about their task, with Arthur helping so that the job was complete in a matter of hours. There was never any doubt, it was always going to be the most rudimentary of canopies, but from a distance it served its purpose. After hoisting it up against the front wall of the house, Horace had sent Arthur to the top of the farthest hill to prove this fact. He had returned and said that, strangely, the house did seem to blend somewhat into the distance. Over the week that followed, everyone was kept very busy with tasks around the farmyard. The windows had to be blacked out and the front door painted a dark grey. Then the front gate had to be locked and shut, and a sign pinned to the front that noted the site was now abandoned. Captain McRae sorted this. He imitated his brother's worst handwriting perfectly, and proudly stuck it to the front of the gate. Throughout this time, Horace could usually be found locked away in the darkest of rooms at the back of the house. He was working on notes and gathering any information for their planned attack. At times, he would call everyone together and announce that he had discovered something that would help them a great deal. Usually, however, this discovery was very minor and didn't actually mean much at all. That was until one particular morning. As soon as they had arrived at the farmhouse, Arthur had given Horace his father's diary and demanded that he took good care of it. Arthur always knew he would, however he needed to be sure. It was a particularly cold morning, and in order to keep warm, Horace had positioned himself in front of the fire and taken to absent-mindedly flipping through the pages of the diary. He had yet to find the key entry, something very important. Yes, he had come across various small pieces of information about the Kraken and the traits you would need to conquer it. He had even discovered more about the divine bloodline, but he was not able to make out that important discovery, and it frustrated him. Since the friend's previous escapade, in which he had managed to capture the silver fox once and for all, Horace had noticed a change in the animal. There seemed a more human element to his behaviour now. Perhaps he knew that now he was away from those woodland animals which he had spent so much time with, he could finally allow the slightest trace of George Boston to shine through. Horace had always been intrigued by the way that George might act when he was amongst those he remembered. Now, as the fox was lying here, curled up in front of the fire at the feet of one of his dearest friends, he looked quietly contented. Yesterday, however, it was a different story. The fox had been full of energy the moment that all four friends were together, and he'd been darting around the farmyard like a streak of lightning, in and out of a very bemused Captain McRae's legs, and jumping up at Arthur until he took him in his arms. Yes, it was true to say that George knew where he was, and he was happy, at least for now. As the fire crackled and the sun began to rise above the windowsill, Horace looked down upon a page of a diary that he did not recognise. It seemed more important than the other pages because it was not crumpled, and upon it were the words of a poem written in dark red ink. Horace read once, and then for good measure, he drew back and thought again. He knew that poem. He hadn't read it recently, but somewhere in the back of his mind there was a recollection. The poem directly referred to the Kraken, and funnily enough, exactly how the Kraken would eventually die. It also referred to the plans the Kraken would have to rule over the land from the sea. Everything was here, and it was all ringing true. Someone must have investigated the Kraken to the point where Horace was at now, but he just could not work out who. Alfred Tennyson had always been one of Horace's favourite poets, and with him being a very learned man, you would expect this. In a last-ditch attempt to discover the origins of the poem, Horace headed upstairs for his book of Tennyson poems, which he had brought with him as light reading material. He was very lucky that this book was present because it provided the answer. Right in the middle pages of the book was a picture of a giant green sea creature, and to the left the words of the Kraken poem. The creature in the picture had bared a very great likeness to Otten's facial features, and it might well have been that Tennyson himself had seen the creature. Horace knew he had read the poem somewhere before, and if it had been written by Tennyson, it must be true. Tennyson was one of the great poets and regarded highly among many learned people and philosophers, Horace included. He really couldn't wait to tell the others. Later that day, Horace called a meeting and proceeded to dish round copies of the poem. Each of the friends had a smile on their face as they read, for they knew this was the answer they were looking for. Horace explained that this was the last piece of evidence. He would be able to now finish his research and draw together his plans in the next few days. Soon enough, they would be ready to launch their attack on that horrible creature. Horace did not know how long it would take to kill the Kraken, or whether they would fail on their first attempt, but he hoped that they would succeed. It felt as though he was coming to the end of a road, that he had discovered enough things about the Kraken to go into battle well armed. So, that is chapter 19, so we've had chapter 18 and 19 of The Kraken's Curse, and tomorrow night I shall be back and I will read chapters 20 and 21. I hope you've all had a wonderful VE Day, celebrating as much as you can in the current climate. I've got a little bit of bunting out in the front of my house. I called my grandma earlier, who's 84 years old, and she remembers the VE Day 75 years ago. And also, I enjoyed watching some of the speeches and stuff that were on TV. And later on tonight, I shall catch up on the rest of the coverage and also the Queen's message at about 9 o'clock. So I hope you all will do that too, and I'll see you back here tomorrow night.